The self-preservation 5 has a strong need for attention as they fear that they will go without otherwise. The greed of the self-preservation 5 comes from the belief that their resources aren't renewable, which means they need to retain what they have as so not to squander them. The self-preservation 9 also puts focus on survival, but instead of retaining their resources like the self-preservation 5, they actively seek to attain everything they could possibly need to ensure survival. The passion of the self-preservation 9 is appetite, a word that describes the basic need of a living being to be fed in connection with the orgasmic perception of feeling hunger. He has lost contact with the feeling of hunger. Very early, and eating has become a way of swallowing without limit or awareness. The self-preservation 9 will take what he believes he needs from the world, while the self-preservation 5 will lock away and retain what little they already have. Appetite is the only thing he can feel, the only possibility to fill his psychological and existential emptiness, his love emptiness. Eating is a defensive action against the wound of not having been adequately welcomed and protected, so that he could have felt that he belonged to the other. Sense of sterility, depletion, and meaninglessness are typical of the E5. It is a psychodynamic consequence of the existential pain of feeling. I am going to set limits because I am little and don't deserve to live. There is a strong focus on autonomy that the self-preservation 5 believes in. One who cannot get others to satisfy their needs builds up his resources, stocking them up inside his ivory tower. 5s are often cold, distant, and apathetic due to this. They need to be self-sufficient as a way to not rely on others. The 5 has a fear that the world is a dangerous place, so if they put their focus into their own internal world, then they will be able to avoid the certain pain that comes along with relationships. However, the belief of the 9 is that they need to be kind, good, and helpful towards others, which means that unlike the 5, the 9 uses relationships to avoid the pain of the world. They over-adapt as a way to indulge so that they can focus more on others rather than their own needs and autonomy. The dependence of the self-preservation 9 manifests as a false independence. They disguise their need for the other by pushing forward. The self-preservation 9 runs away from the world before the world can reject him. This can appear similar to the self-preservation 5. However, the self-preservation 5 rejects the world rather than flees. They convince themselves that they don't need to be a part of the world, whereas the 9 wants to, but is afraid of being rejected by it. However, the self-preservation 9 often puts on an image of someone who does not need to be comforted and cared for, as he does not want to show his weakness. The 5 is pessimistic about receiving care and protection or having the power to demand or take what he needs. The 5's fear of commitment is born from their fear of losing autonomy. They see commitment as a debt that they do not feel capable of satisfying. In order to keep what he has to feel free, the character draws away. The self-preservation 5 feels uncomfortable with being told what to do. He will finally do what's best for him or what's stubbornly in his mind. Self-preservation 9s repress their anger as they don't want to acknowledge the fact that they hold this anger. He does not usually show anger, and if he does, he does not stay there for a long time. It is hard for him to be angry. The self-preservation 5 feels defenseless when facing the outside world. That, coupled with the feeling of having no one to protect him, makes him angry. The 5 processes anger through contempt, turning his back against a world that does not deserve it. Unlike the 9, who uses repression and doesn't recognize their anger, the 5 acknowledges it, yet tends to not outwardly act on it, instead using passive aggressiveness to show anger. The self-preservation 5 will often turn aggression on themselves. The character reproaches, which feeds into the conviction that isolation is the only way to survive, continuing the vicious cycle. The self-preservation 9 often acts on impulse and doesn't take time to reflect. The self-preservation 9 cannot distinguish himself from the other, instead blindly follows the impulse because it is a moment of vitality, of jumping into life without a parachute, convinced that he has the situation under control without a project or real pleasure. The 5, however, avoids taking action, as they fear wasting their energy and resources. The 5 suffers from an objective impoverishment of experience. In his inaction, the 5 has a desire not to act in the world, not to harm or interfere. Nothing moves him, therefore he never acts. This inaction can show inconsistency, even in his retreats. He appears and disappears, implying he wants to be alone. The observer of the world uses knowledge on survival mode. It is best to be prepared in front of a hostile world, since knowledge brings order and analysis in the face of chaos. He indulges in an endless preparation for life. Through things such as reading, he never really feels ready to hop into action. The 5 seeks to avoid pain at all costs through avoiding the world and hiding away from a world that they perceive to be able to hurt them. The 9, however, overindulges to avoid this pain. They believe that if they numb themselves, they won't experience the pain. Pain for the 9 is also avoided through disconnect. The self-preservation 9 has the action not to preserve themselves. How to do everything that would not be convenient for you. How to do everything not to contact the pain you feel in your soul. How to do everything not to contact yourself or the other. Overindulgence for the self-preservation 9 is a way of avoiding pain and a defense mechanism. In the self-preservation 9, laziness is described as anti and works to cover the thirst, cover the pain, and avoid getting into the subject. 5s are hypersensitive to rejection in a similar way to the 9. However, their fear of rejection leads them to end up rejecting the world, whereas the 9 attempts to be accepted by the world through people-pleasing. For fear of pain, the 5 does not let anything in the world enrich him, fearing that the invasion and lack he will be left with if he does. The self-preservation 9 needs someone to tell him what he doesn't know, to tell him what to do. He uses dependence as a way to not take responsibility for himself or the way he feels. He sets aside his self-imposed limitations. He can be brave, kamikaze even. In these situations, he needs positive support from the environment, since a negative response leads him to doubt himself. Veracity is a defense mechanism against lack of love, contact, and stimuli being experienced at the beginning of life. A basic characteristic is to postpone all your desires and all the actions that suit you and put you in touch with your life. If you give the world what it wants, it won't kill you. If he puts himself at the world's service, he will be safe. The E5 is characterized by not giving. The 5 needs to be completely free, unbound, unobstructed, and in possession of the fullness of themselves. A compulsion to not give can hardly be sustained except at the expense of the relationship itself, as if the individual considered, if the only way to hold on to what little I have is to distance myself away from others and their needs or wants, this is what I'll do. The 9 feels a neurotic need to take care of others because he doesn't take care of himself. The 9 feels as though they need to fit in. He does not want to be seen because he has always felt left over, that he was in the way. He almost apologizes just for being there, for existing. He disqualifies himself from being disqualified so that they do not see him as a rival. The self-preservation 5 does not feel the need to take care of others and often distances themselves away from others. 5s have a strong disinterest in relationships, which leads them to only be interested in their own things, which make them less accommodating than the self-preservation 9. Due to their perceived vulnerability, they do not openly oppose the group, as they feel as though this will lead to a conflict and drain their own resources. Because of this, the self-preservation 5 is seen as overly docile, similarly to the self-preservation 9. If I am tough or confrontational, I will hurt. I enjoy, therefore I exist. It is a concrete thing that always feels, always buying more food than you need. Veracity is activated in a response to anxiety, to the anguish of inner emptiness. It thus becomes a form of narcotization. It is a chaotic impulsiveness to fix everything at once, to put things in their place for the shortest time possible, anxiously in apnea, with a carnivorous desire that makes them devour time without savoring it. The existential routine of the 5 is seen as an overabundance of energy saving. They seek to make themselves as inaccessible as possible to the world. Security is linked to survival. He sees this as tightening boundaries with the world in order to reduce interactions. The 5 doesn't indulge like the 9 does, as they fear that what little they have will deplete if they want for more, so instead out their energy into conserving what they already have. The Conservation 9 lives looking outside. He is a spectator of the world because he is not in contact with himself, and in this way he forgets himself. His distorted interpretation of reality is focused on forgetting, erasing from consciousness any stimulus that can lead him to contacting his heart or mind. For the Self-Preservation 5, interiority is a way of preserving their energy, time, and resources that they believe will be drained from them from the outside world. The Self-Preservation 5 sees the world as completely untrustworthy. They have perceived that reality is dangerous and try to keep themselves from harm's way. They feel secure in their interiority. Security is linked to survival, which he sees as tightening boundaries with the world. The reason the 5 stays in his cave is because they are hypersensitive beings, extremely vulnerable and easy to hurt. The 5 does not want to initiate contact with an invasive and violent external world, which has caused him suffering and which he still believes will annihilate him. The defense mechanism of the 5 is to isolate themselves through an interruption of their own relationship with the world. They separate themselves from the emotions that outside occurrences force them to deal with. It is not only the emotional content that is isolated, but the connection bearing within the intellectual content itself, which results in the loss of true and deep meaning of the traumatic experience. They believe that if they can disconnect themselves from an event completely, they cannot be hurt by it. The incongruence of aloofness with the ordinary human need for contact is maintained through dulling their emotional life. The E9 defense mechanism is through narcotization, where they distract themselves from their inner experience through the outside world. They want to experience life in a watered-down way, by avoiding the negative aspects of life. While the E5 keeps interiority to protect themselves, the 9 seeks the outside world as a distraction from their interiority.